On a cliff in Northern Ireland, during a storm in 1639, the kitchen of a castle fell into the sea, in the middle of the evening meal, with everyone still inside. This is a video about 7 castles in Europe that died on a single day. Not slow decay, 1 hour, sometimes 1 minute. And every one of them left something behind that you can still walk up to and see. We are starting with that kitchen, number 7. Number 7, Dunluce Castle, County Antrim, Northern Ireland. 1 person survived, a fiddler sitting in the corner of the kitchen beside the fireplace, the only corner of the room that did not fall. Dunluce sits on a black basalt outcrop on the north coast of Ireland, 30 meters above the Atlantic, separated from the mainland by a chasm. By that time, it was the seat of the MacDonalds, one of the richest families in Europe. Indoor plumbing in the 1600s. A town of 40 houses crammed on the cliff below. The wife of the MacDonald lord, Catherine, hated it. She said the sound of the sea at night made her uneasy. She was right to be uneasy. The kitchen at Dunluce was built next to the Great Hall, as it was in every castle, so the food would reach the table hot. At Dunluce, that put it right on the seaward edge of the cliff, and the sea had been working underneath that cliff for a very long time. According to the account that has survived, it happened during a storm. The floor gave way, the walls followed, the kitchen, its contents, and almost everyone inside it went straight down into the sea cave beneath the castle. Catherine refused to spend another night there. The MacDonalds abandoned Dunluce within decades. The town below collapsed with it, and was only rediscovered by archaeologists in this century. Today, you can walk through the ruins up to the seaward edge. The outer wall stops, not tumbled, not eroded, just gone, as if somebody removed a piece from a puzzle. Below runs a sea cave called the Mermaid's Cave. On calm days, you can hear water moving through it. On rough days, the sound is something else entirely. Some sources put the collapse later in the century. What is not in doubt is that the seaward edge of the kitchen is missing, that the Atlantic took it, and that Dunluce has been a ruin ever since. Number 6, Chateau Gaillard, Normandy, France. 90 miles northwest of Paris, on a chalk cliff above the Seine, are the ruins of the most advanced castle in medieval Europe. It fell because somebody forgot to put a bar across a toilet. Chateau Gaillard was built in less than 2 years by Richard the Lionheart. Walls 8 feet thick, 17 towers. A moat 45 feet deep. Richard boasted he could hold it even if the walls were made of butter. Contemporaries called it invincible. Here is how invincible it turned out to be. Richard died in 1199. His younger brother John inherited the castle, and John was not Richard. By 1203, the French king Philip Augustus was camped outside with 6,000 men. 6 months later, he still could not take it. Then a French soldier named Pierre Bogus, Peter the Snub-Nose, noticed something. High on the chapel wall was an unbarred window. Below it, at the base, was a small drain, a chute. It was the latrine. Bogus and a handful of men climbed up the drain, pulled themselves into the chapel through the latrine shaft, and started making as much noise as they could. The English defenders, thinking a large force had materialized inside the chapel, panicked and lit a fire to smoke them out. The wind changed. The fire came back at them. And while they were busy fighting their own fire, Bogus opened the gates. On March 6th, 1204, the most sophisticated fortress in medieval Europe surrendered because somebody forgot to put a bar across a toilet. Within 2 years, Normandy was French. Richard's empire in France started to come apart. The castle today is a bleached ruin on a cliff. There is a plaque. It does not mention the latrine. Richard boasted he could defend Gaillard, even if the walls were made of butter. He did not consider the plumbing. Number 5, Rocca Calascio, Abruzzo, Italy. At the top of a bare limestone ridge in central Italy, nearly 1,500 meters above sea level, stands the highest fortress in the entire Apennine range. In 1,000 years of existence, no army ever attacked it. It was destroyed anyway. The Rocca was built to watch the Novelli plain below, the road to L'Aquila, the wool trade that paid for Florence. 4 round towers, a central keep, walls of white stone. Soldiers garrisoned it for centuries, and for 1,000 years, the fortress designed to hold off armies did its job so well that no army ever came. What came instead was the ground. On the morning of February 2nd, 1703, a magnitude 7 earthquake hit central Italy. 5,000 people died. The city of L'Aquila, 40 kilometers away, was largely destroyed. The village at the base of the Rocca was flattened, and at the summit, the fortress that had watched over everything for 800 years cracked open in seconds. Walls split. Towers collapsed into themselves. The villagers did the only sensible thing. They went down the ridge to the lower village of Calascio, which was easier to rebuild. The upper village has been empty ever since. The fortress is still up there, 4 round towers still standing. The central keep still there. The white stone bleached silver gray now. It was partly restored in the 1980s, when a Hollywood film needed a medieval-looking fortress. Lady Hawk was filmed there. So was The Name of the Rose. Armies you can watch. You can count them on the road below. You can shut the gate. The earth gives no warning at all. If you have made it this far, consider subscribing. The strongest entries are still ahead. Number 3 is a day so specific that there is still a memorial on the ground where it happened. Before that, we are going to England, to a castle defended by a woman with 5 men against an army of 600. Number 4, Corfe Castle, Dorset, England. In 1643, a 45-year-old woman with 11 children and 5 soldiers defended an English castle against an army of 600 men. She held it for 3 years. Her own officer betrayed her, and then her government blew it up so that nobody could ever use it again. That is why Corfe looks the way it looks. Broken towers, walls tilting at angles no castle is supposed to tilt at. The kind of ruin you pass on a country road and almost stop the car. The English Civil War was being fought between supporters of King Charles I, the Royalists, and supporters of Parliament. The Banks family owned Corfe. Sir John Banks was Attorney General to the King, and he was away fighting for him. His wife Mary was home. She sent the boys away. In May of 1643, parliamentary forces demanded she hand over the castle's cannons. She refused. They tried to climb the walls. She fired the cannons at them. They withdrew. In June, 600 parliamentarians came back with siege engines. Mary defended the upper ward herself, with her daughters, her maidservants, and her 5 men. When soldiers tried to scale the walls, they had hot embers and stones thrown down on them from above. The parliamentarians lost over 100 men. They retreated so fast that they left behind their horses, their cannon, and, according to one account, their dinner. Corfe held. For 2.5 more years, it held. By the end of 1645, the war was almost over. The second siege began. One of Mary's own officers, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Pittman, decided he was going to save himself. In February of 1646, he left the castle to fetch reinforcements. He came back with a group of parliamentary soldiers. Their coats turned inside out, so the colors looked like royalist ones. The governor opened the gate. 3 years of siege ended in an afternoon. There is one thing in the record that complicates the legend. By the time of the second siege, Mary Banks was probably not even in the castle. Records suggest she was in London. The story of her pouring hot embers on parliamentarian heads is real, but it belongs to the first siege, not the last. When Corfe finally fell, she was not there. Parliament decided to destroy the castle completely. Soldiers drilled holes around the base of every tower and packed them with gunpowder. They lit the charges one at a time. Each one took down a section of wall. The towers did not fall cleanly. Some slid sideways, some split in half. Some, because the stone was so well made, refused to come down at all and just tilted. Those are the walls you can still see today, exactly as they were left on the day of the demolition in 1646. A Civil War snapshot. Mary Banks was given back the keys to the castle as a gesture of respect. They are still on display at Kingston Lacy, the family's later home. She died in 1661. She lost it, and then she outlived the men who destroyed it. Number 3. Chateau de Montsegur, Ariège, southern France. This is the hardest one. I am going to ask you to be patient with it. On March the 16th, 1244, about 220 people were led down a mountain in southern France and burned alive in a wooden pen at its base. 21 of them had walked into that fire voluntarily. They had been offered a way out 2 weeks earlier and had refused it. The mountain is called the Puig de Montsegur. It rises 1,200 meters out of the countryside in the foothills of the Pyrenees, like a tooth. On top are the ruins of a small castle, a rectangle of walls, a keep, a view that goes forever. The people who died there were Cathars, a dissident Christian movement in southern France that Rome considered heretical. In 1209, the Pope launched a crusade against them, a 20-year war that killed most of them or forced them to recant. A few hundred, priests, their families, soldiers, retreated to the top of Montsegur. For about 10 years, nobody bothered them. Then, in 1242, a small Cathar raiding party massacred 11 Catholic inquisitors in their sleep in a town 100 kilometers away. The King of France sent 10,000 soldiers to the mountain. The siege began in May of 1243. There were a little over 400 people on the mountain. Perhaps 70 were fighting men. The rest were civilians, priests, their families, people with nowhere else to go. The siege lasted 10 months. The royal army could not take the summit. Winter came. By every normal measure, the siege should have failed. Then in January of 1244, a group of Basque mercenaries did something nobody had thought was possible. They climbed the eastern face of the mountain, in the dark, in winter, and they dragged a catapult up after them. From that point on, the castle was under bombardment day and night. The defenders tried to dislodge them. They failed. In early March, they offered to negotiate surrender. The terms of the surrender are what make Montsegur what it is. Non-combatants could leave unharmed. Soldiers could leave lightly punished. Every person inside the castle who was a Cathar, who refused to renounce their faith, would be burned at the stake. The truce would last 15 days. The Cathars had 15 days to decide whether to walk away from their faith or walk into a fire. And here is the detail nobody who knows this story ever forgets. During those 15 days, 21 more people who had not been Cathars before, who were absolutely free to walk down the mountain and go home, took the Cathar vow, the ceremony that made them, in the eyes of the Inquisition, heretics subject to death by fire. These were servants, soldiers, ordinary people. They chose the fire instead of the easy way down. On the morning of March 16th, the truce ended. The Inquisitors had built a wooden palisade at the base of the mountain. They filled it with firewood. About 220 Cathars, men, women, and the 21 late converts, were led down from the castle in a single procession. The sick and the wounded were carried down on stretchers. They were thrown over the palisade into the fire. None of them renounced. The place where this happened is now a field. It is still known in the local Occitan language as the Prat dels Cremats, the field of the burned. There is a stone marker there, placed in 1960. After the surrender, the castle was torn down. The ruins you see on the mountain today are not the castle the Cathars defended. That castle was demolished. The stone rectangle standing up there now was built by the next French owner, a generation later. On the same spot, using some of the same stones. You walk through the gate. You stand inside a building that was built by the victors on the grave of the defeated. And if you take the main path back down, you walk right past the field of the burned on your way to the parking lot. That is Montsegur. One day, 220 people. A religion ended. Number 2, Poenari Castle, Arges County, Romania. The castle on the cliff belonged to Dracula, not the fictional one, the real one, Vlad III of Wallachia. Vlad the Impaler, the man the novel was loosely named after, 500 years later. Poenari was his personal stronghold, high in the Carpathian Mountains, on a cliff above the river Arges. And on a single day in 1462, his wife jumped from the top of its tower into the river below. The river has been called the River of the Princess on every map since. Vlad was fighting a real war against the Ottoman Empire, and his preferred method of executing enemies, impalement, was real, documented, and the reason entire armies sometimes turned around and went home when they saw what he had left behind. He rebuilt Poenari in the 1450s using forced labor. According to Romanian tradition, most of the laborers were noblemen he had captured after a dispute at court and worked to death on the walls. In the summer of 1462, Vlad pushed the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire too far. The Sultan sent a massive army to replace him. Vlad fought, burned his own country ahead of their advance, and fell back toward Poenari. His wife was there. The Ottomans were coming up the valley. Here the story becomes legend more than history. There are several versions. I'm telling you the most repeated one. A loyal archer outside the castle shot an arrow through one of the narrow windows, with a note wrapped around the shaft. The note warned that the Ottomans were only hours away. When Vlad's wife read it, she understood that there was no way out. The path down the mountain was already cut off. She climbed to the top of one of the towers. She looked down at the river far below. And she said, in the version that has been passed down, that she would rather feed the fish of the Arges than be a captive of the Turks. Then she jumped. The river she fell into has been named after her ever since. Vlad himself was not in the castle when the Ottomans arrived. He escaped, the legend says, through a secret passage under the mountain, with horses shod backwards, so the hoofprints pointed the wrong way. That part is almost certainly myth. What is true is that the Ottomans took the castle easily, and Vlad survived. Poenari was used, off and on, for another 50 years, then abandoned. In the 19th century, an earthquake brought down most of the north wall and sent large sections of it tumbling down the mountain into the river. To get to the castle today, you climb 1,480 steps, one of the steepest climbs to a castle ruin anywhere in Europe. At the top, there is almost nothing left, a few walls, a partial tower, a view of the Arge Valley that has not changed in 500 years. Somewhere in the river below is a woman who chose the river over what was coming up the mountain. We do not know her name for certain. The legend kept her, even when the record did not. And finally, number 1. Kilchurn Castle, Loch Owl, Argyll and Bute, Scotland. On a stormy night in 1760, lightning hit the top of a tower in the Scottish Highlands. The top of the tower, an entire conical stone cap, shaped like an upside-down funnel, was torn off the wall in one piece. It flipped in the air and landed on the grass in the courtyard below. It is still sitting there, 300 years later, upside down, exactly where it fell. The castle was Kilchurn, on a peninsula at the northeastern end of Loch Awe, the longest freshwater loch in Scotland. It was built in the 1440s by Margaret Campbell, whose husband had gone on crusade to Rhodes on a trip that would take years. Rather than wait, she built a castle. For 300 years, the Campbells used it. They garrisoned it through the Jacobite risings, the rebellions that tried to put the Stuart dynasty back on the British throne. By the 1740s, the Campbells had moved to a grander house in the east of Scotland. Kilchurn was cold, damp, expensive, and remote. But they did not tear it down. They kept it maintained. There was still a roof. There was still glass in some of the windows. Then the storm came. If you walk up to Kilchurn today, and it is easy to get there, you will see the stone cap in the courtyard. Most visitors walk right past it. It looks like a low-stepped stone podium. An odd feature. Maybe the base of something. Maybe a ceremonial platform. It is the top of the tower. It is sitting where it fell the morning after the storm. The Campbells had the money to rebuild. They chose not to. The world Kilchurn had been built for was over. The last Jacobite uprising had been crushed at Culloden 14 years earlier. There was no reason left to defend this place. They walked away. Today, it is the most photographed castle in Scotland. And when you stand in the courtyard next to that upside-down stone cap, it is very hard not to think about the night. The storm over Loch Awe, the lightning, the single blow, and the 3 centuries of Campbell power that were, in that one instant, quietly and permanently finished. 7 castles. In Northern Ireland, a kitchen fell into the sea in the middle of dinner. A fortress in Normandy was opened by a soldier crawling up a toilet drain. The highest castle in the Apennines stood for 800 years without ever being attacked. And the ground shook it apart in a morning. In England, a woman defended her home for 3 years, and her own government demolished it, 1 stick of gunpowder at a time. On a mountain in southern France, 220 people walked into a fire because they had decided, over 15 days, that the fire was the better choice. A princess in Romania jumped from a tower, and the river below the castle has carried her name ever since. And in Scotland, a lightning bolt took the top off a tower, and the top is still lying there 300 years later, exactly where it fell. Most castles die the way most things die. Slowly, a window falling in 1 year, a wall the next. These 7 did not. And back where we started, on the cliff at Dunluce, at the place where the wall simply stops, listen, on a rough day, to the sea cave that runs underneath the castle. The sound is not a ghost. It is not a legend. It is the same sound that was there in the kitchen on the night the floor gave way. The Atlantic, still doing what it was doing, still hollowing out the rock, still patient. The sea did not announce itself in 1639. It will not announce itself the next time either. Thank you for watching.